the number on your screen. This evening, Books and Books, in collaboration with the Consulate General of Brazil in Miami and Centro Cultural Brasil, is very happy to welcome Mr. Alexandre Vidal Porto, presenting his new novel, Sergio, Why? And here to host the evening for us, we have a very distinguished guest. Please welcome to the podium Ambassador Helio Ramos.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Books and Books for sharing this occasion with the Consul General of Brazil in Miami. Tonight we have the satisfaction of the presence of a bright young Brazilian writer who is also a fellow diplomat and a personal friend of mine. To open this event, I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Tracy Guzman, who will say some words about the work of Alexandre Vidal Porto. Dr. Guzman is Director of Graduate Studies and Associate Professor of Latin American Studies at the University of Miami College of Arts and Science, a PhD in Latin American and Romance Studies. Dr. Guzman is also a scholar in the Brazilian culture and society. Dr. Guzman, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ramos. Good evening, boa noite. It's an honor to introduce Alexandre Vidal Porto, whom I've had the pleasure of meeting just this evening. Alexandre holds a master's degree in law from Harvard University and has dedicated much of his professional trajectory to human rights advocacy. Alexandre hails from São Paulo, the megacity where the novel Sergio Y both begins and ends. But he has spent the greater part of his career working outside Brazil as a diplomat in many places, including Tokyo, Mexico City, Washington, D.C., Santiago de Chile, and New York, where in between the beginning and the end of the novel in São Paulo, the rest of Sergio Y takes place. In addition to his long career in diplomacy, which seems clearly to have marked the genesis of his literary work, Alexandre is the author of Matias na Cidade, Matias in the City, published by Editora Record in 2005, of short stories, and of a weekly column for the Folha de São Paulo, arguably Brazil's most important and most influential newspaper. The work that he discusses today is the English language version of his second novel, Sergio Y vai América, published by Companhia das Letras in 2014, which won the Prêmio Paraná de Literatura, the literary prize of the state of Paraná, in 2014. So, my two curious school-age daughters who read everything over my shoulder these days saw me with the book in my hand last weekend, and they wanted to know, what is it about? A fair question, right? For anyone who's found reading a book, and certainly for a cultural critic, but not, I would venture, a very easy question to answer in this case. Most published reviews of Sergio Y and the blurbs on sites of editorial houses and book vendors will say, for example, that it's a novel about gender, about identity, and about happiness. True enough, I thought, after finishing the book, but it's also about so much more. To limit the scope of the novel to gender, identity, and happiness is, in my assessment, to cut it short. So without delving into too many details or making myself a spoiler, as I understand that's not my task here this evening, I can say that Sergio Y is in some ways a modern-day Bildungsroman, a story that through the absence and the remembrance of its key protagonist depicts a transnational coming-of-age story, transnational in more than one way, that links Brazil to the United States and is at the same time deeply engaged with contemporary identity politics and some of the most urgent human rights questions of our day. These questions transcend both state and national frontiers. And although LGBTQ rights have come to the fore of widespread political discourse in Brazil and the United States, with great strides being made in both countries over the past few years, one does have the sinking sense that positive social change has not been shared equally, and that one step forward for some has led to two steps back for others. And so the novel that we have before us and the fictitious story of Sergio Y is certainly of the utmost importance, not only as a fine work of fiction, but also as a glimpse into an often misunderstood and misportrayed humanity of others, into a form of being in the world that is branded in the book by two different characters as monstrous and the devil's work. I submit then that Sergio Y is indeed about gender, identity, happiness, and the relationship among those elements of the human experience. But it is also about the infinite complexity and difficulty of interpersonal communication. It's about migration, personal discovery, and the challenge of reinventing oneself out of different kinds of necessity. And it's about the palimpsest that we all are as human beings who layer our life experience and our learning processes onto our bodies and carry them with us as we make our way through the world. So finally, I have to say that for me, Sergio Y is above all a story about love. The love, for example, of medical caretakers for those under their care, the love of parents and children, and the sometimes very difficult love and understanding of self that makes possible the love and the understanding of others. And so taking a look at the political climate reflected in the headlines today, from North Carolina to Missouri to New York to São Paulo to Mato Grosso do Sul to Brasilia, and to so many places in between, I venture that we could all benefit from a bit more love and understanding of self and other. And so I thank Alexandre Vidal Porto for the critical lessons of this wonderful book, and I look forward to having him share more of it with us.
Good evening, all. Thank you, Professor Guzman. Thank you, Ambassador Ramos. And it's a question about what this book is about, because most critics say that it's about transgenderism, it's about sexual identity, but it is, but not only. I think I would like to, when I started writing this novel, I didn't know exactly what to expect, because basically I was writing a novel, a short story, on a Brazilian transgender who had been brutally murdered in Spain. And on the other hand, I was also writing a short story on a relationship between a psychotherapist and her patient. But neither story was going anywhere. So I was just with the two stories in a drawer. And when I had, for professional reasons, to make a road trip from Mexico City to Washington, D.C. with 3 bulldogs in tow. And it was not easy, but one of the things you do when you have like a 50-hour drive is try to, to use your time gainfully. And in my case, my husband and I, we decided to listen to a series of lectures on American poetry. And when we got to, when we got to Brooklyn Ferry, crossing Brooklyn Ferry, the Walt Whitman's poem about the dialogue between people, across generations and places, then the two stories made sense to me. And so what I can tell is that the story basically, without having to give any spoilers, but it's narrated by an esteemed psychotherapist in São Paulo who tells the story of Sergio Y, his favorite patient, a 17-year-old boy from an affluent family in São Paulo, who quits therapy abruptly, only to be found 5 years later having reinvented himself as a woman in New York. And the story of the book is more or less, follows the path of Dr. Armando, following the path of his favorite patient. So some people say it's let's say a book about existential questions wrapped as a detective story. But I think that the stories will be much better served by my reading than my trying to explain. Books should be self-explanatory, right? So my idea in this reading is to have 4 different sections, to read 4 different sections, so you will be able to have, let's say, a span over the whole story and have an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay? So I just have to fight with this. Be nice to me, okay? All right. So the idea is to I'll read the first. I'll read the name of the chapter. In fact, I mean I'll call them chapters, but they're all more like sections. They're very short sections, and then I'll proceed to the reading. All you need to know about me. Since I mean to speak of the lives of others, it is only fair that I speak of mine. My name is Armando. I turned 70 last month. Generally, people think I am older. It has been that way my entire life. I have come to expect it when I meet someone for the first time. I appear older than I am. This visible premature aging is common among psychiatrists. We absorb our patients' problems. We grow old for them. I am one of the city's best doctors. It may sound immodest, I know, to refer to myself in such a manner, but that is how I am referred to when my work is mentioned. I am proud of the recognition I have earned over the years. I am vain, but it doesn't bother me. I have always thought modesty an overrated quality. I realize vanity can be a treacherous thing. I think, however, that in my life it has played a constructive role. My vanity has meant I have rarely found it necessary to diverge from the natural dictates of my will. As a professional, I have opted not to make compromises. I have approached my profession on my terms. Things might not have worked out, but fortunately, they did. I want to make clear that at this point in my life, I have no desire to lay bare the intimate details of a person who has entrusted his privacy to me. However, if I comment on this case and am somehow remiss with regard to my professional oath, my reasons for doing so have great merit. It is true, I have not kept secret what my eyes have seen and my ears have heard. I know, but I do have principles. My intention in telling this story is not to do harm. I want to become a better doctor and a more principled human being. My intent is to learn. The patient I will speak of came to my office recommended by his school principal, a friend of mine from college, and in her email she said a 17-year-old student, quote, articulate, intelligent, and confused, end of quote, would call. According to her, it was an interesting case. I took note of that. The interesting patient. It was a very hot day in São Paulo. On the streets that morning, people walked around hoping rain would come and cool things off. No one imagined, though, that it would grow dark so suddenly or that so much water would fall from the sky. The hour and a half of rain was enough to disturb the entire flow of traffic in the city. My office is on the 20th floor of an office building. From my window, I can see the Marginal Pinheiros highway below. Sitting in my armchair, I could see the dark clouds move in and cover the sky and darken the entire horizon. I turned the lights on at the front desk and walked to the pantry to make some coffee. I returned with my mug, resigned to the fact that the possible new patient would never make it to our first session. He would never make it on time. He would get stuck in traffic. Such was life in São Paulo. Sitting under the office lights, I expected at any moment to receive a phone call, the minimum courtesy under the circumstances, canceling the appointment. Meanwhile, so as not to waste time, I began to read the thesis of a student I was advising. Sergio Y's appointment was the last item on my calendar that day, but since he could not make it, I would end my day early. I would stay in the office until the traffic eased up, and then I would have an easy commute home. I would not meet the intelligent and confused young man my college friend had referred to me, but I would have time to read Luciana Cossomelli's thesis, something I needed to do anyway. At that time, it made no difference whether I met a new patient or finished reading a dissertation on the methodology for establishing public mental health centers. It was all work, and it had to be done. However, at 5 p.m. on the dot, the office doorbell rang. To my surprise, he had arrived on time. I was impressed. Since the receptionist had left early because of the rain, I opened the door myself. He wore jeans, sneakers, and a white t-shirt with a picture of Mickey Mouse. Before greeting me with a handshake, he introduced himself. I'm Sergio Y. Professor Eloise Andrade from the Rousseau School referred me. How do you do? I recognized the last name and deduced whose son he was. I knew his father by name. At the time, however, I had no way of knowing he owed his straight dark hair to his mother. In the office, he waited for me to invite him to sit. Then, looking straight at me, very confidently, he took the initiative and began. He said he had asked the school principal to recommend a therapist because he, quote, wanted to guarantee himself a future that was minimally happy. I'm very pessimistic, he said. The great-grandfather. The most interesting and productive sessions we had were those where Sergio Y spoke of his great-grandfather, Areg Yacubian, who at 16 boarded a ship for Brazil. Sergio told me how his great-grandfather had settled in the city of Belém, where a countryman, Hagop Moscovian, had opened a wholesale distribution company 4 years earlier. His ship arrived in Pará in March of 1915 after making stops in Recife and Fortaleza. Areg's first job was as a warehouseman. He prided himself on being fast and keeping tight control over inventory. He helped Hagop as needed. For 20 minutes every night before bed, he would struggle to read the news in the Notícias do Pará in an attempt to teach himself some Portuguese. He had a reputation for being frugal and good-natured and living for his work. When Areg arrived in Belém, Hagop set him up in a small room above the store, which Areg slowly appropriated, during his first year on the job. The space soon became his bedroom and his dream room, as Sergio was keen to stress, quoting his great-grandfather. I have a recurring dream of my great-grandfather, Areg. In the dream, he gives a speech, but I'm the only person in the audience. He begins, but he speaks softly and I can barely hear him. I move closer, but I can only make out his last word. Happy. I know why I have this dream. It's because of my memories of Areg's 100th birthday party in Pará. My whole family traveled to Belém. My parents, my Uncle Elias, my Aunt Valeria, my cousin José, everyone. We all stayed in my grandfather's house. The speech as he remembered. Now that I've turned 100, I know that life is too short to be sad. A happy life is more happy days than sad ones. So, the advice I give to the young ones is this: always try to make your days happy. The important thing is having as many happy days as possible. We must never forget that sadness exists, because we know sadness really does exist. But you must reject sadness and unhappiness. You must also work hard, because work helps in everything. When I was a child, I never imagined there was a country on the other side of the world called Brazil, nor that I myself would one day become a Brazilian. Had I resigned myself and stayed in my city, the place where I was born, our family name would no longer exist. There would be no Areg, there would be no Hagop, there would be no Elias, there would be no Solomon, or Sergio, or José. There would be no one. Our name would have disappeared. There would be no Jacobians here now. So, the message I want to leave the youth is that you must believe in happiness. Then, go after her, even if that means you must do something new that you never could have imagined before. Happiness comes from the courage to do something new. Happiness exists. I am proof of this. You know, the title of this chapter is too revealing, so I'll just skip this one, okay? Because then the spoiler Professor Guzman was avoiding to give, I would give instead. So just skip the title. Let's say Chapter X, okay? I would have gone to the restaurant in a pair of nice trousers, a dress shirt, a blazer, and no tie. I would have gone alone on one of those nights when Mariana had plans with her friends from college. Sandra would have come out dressed in a chef's uniform with a chef's coat and a net for her long hair. Atop the net, she would wear a white chef's hat, the kind we see on television. After saying hello, I would ask, Where's Sergio? Do you know what happened to Sergio? Sandra would smile and say, Sergio and I traded places, Dr. Armando. I used to be your patient too. You just never saw me. I spoke through Sergio. That deep voice was mine. Now it's me, Sandra, who's visible. I've been giving a reprieve from my life sentence. Sergio still exists, but he's inside me now, hidden in the past. It made me happy when Mother told me she'd run into you at the supermarket. I always wanted to see you again. I always wanted to tell you my secret. I never told you I was trans because, to tell you the truth, I never had the opportunity. There were so many other things to talk about. At first, I hoped you would confront me about it. But since you never did, and since I still enjoyed our sessions and learned from them, I continued my treatment with you. I had nothing to lose. Not everything in life is sexual identity, right? The father's response to the letter. He was a normal boy. He was in therapy with you, but he was normal. You met him. He told us he wanted to see a therapist because he was having trouble deciding what to do with his life. What were we to do? We said yes. Anyway, therapy is relatively common nowadays, but I confess a warning signal went off inside me. After Christmas, when he talked to me and his mother and told us he wanted to live in New York, and he said, live, not visit, hang out, none of that. He said, live. It was a big surprise. I had a suspicion that something might not be going well, but none of us understood the reason he decided to live in New York. A few days later, he told us he wasn't who we thought he was. It was hard to hear from my only son that he was a woman, that he wanted to go to New York because there he could live as a woman, have a sex change operation, change his name, be who he thought he was. It wasn't easy to hear. I was shocked by what he was telling us, but I was even more shocked by the calm and poised manner with which he communicated his decision to us. The proposal he made to us was that we would let him live in New York for 2 years to do the sexual reassignment treatment with a doctor named Kutz. To me, it all sounded crazy, but I thought maybe it was just a phase. We all went to New York, Teresa, Sergio, and I, to talk to Dr. Kutz, who told us about our son being transgender. It took me a long time to understand the nature of what Sergio felt, but I never turned my back on him. I gave him all the support I could. I was sorry for him and for myself. I would never have grandchildren. He would never take over the family business. It was awful when I saw him dressed as a woman for the first time. I wanted to rip his clothes off and find my son underneath those clothes, those painted nails, but I did nothing. Nothing. I just avoided eye contact. I kept my head down. I felt love and hate at the same time for what, to me, was a caricature of my son. That first time, I controlled myself. and I continued to control myself afterwards. I couldn't lose him. I asked God to help me to get used to that I learned to accept it, that the sight of my emasculated son dressed as a woman become acceptable to me. I thought of that saying, if you love the ugly, beautiful you seem to them. If I had seen you, I would have been proud. After his death, I stopped calling him Sandra. So did Solomon. For us, Sandra was Sergio. The child I gave birth to was named Sergio. While he was alive, however, we referred to him as Sandra because he asked us to, and Dr. Kutz recommended we did. When I heard of his transsexuality, my first thought was that I'd failed. I was a woman who gave birth to imperfect things, incomplete things. My womb was not fruitful. It was malformed, subhuman, I thought. I didn't want any of this. I wish it had all been a dream. But we don't get to do what we want, do we? What could I have done? There are a lot of things we do for love. I carried Sergio, Sandra, whatever, inside my body. I never gave up on my son because I could not stop loving him. It was worth it. After he moved to New York, everything changed for the better. There was the sex change operation, which wasn't easy, but Sandra became an admirable person. I know he's my son, and I'm biased when I say this, but what she achieved as a person and was achieving professionally was very special. I think that in some shape or form, this was a result of all the love his father and I gave him. I will never forget one spring day when we walked across Central Park to the west side. We walked side by side, breathing in the spring air. It was shortly after her operation. Out of nowhere, she said, "Mom, I never thought I'd be this happy." Dr. Armando, it helps to remember that we did a good job with Sergio. Let's not suffer over him. He wouldn't have liked that. He succeeded in being Sandra. It's what he wanted. He was happy. He didn't dwell over his misery. It was great seeing him so excited about his restaurant, seeing her look so beautiful, like a model. It was worth it. Some lives are short. Others start off badly and get better. Sergio's life was a combination of the two. We supported Sergio as best we could. We gave it our all. There was the physical distance, but that was good for his treatment, Dr. Kutz said. You never saw him then, but believe me, if you'd seen her, you would have been proud. Thank you. you. So, I don't know if you would have some questions or...
If you can wait, I also have a mic so that everybody can hear your question.
Thank you for that absolutely lovely reading. It's a
thank
real
you.
inspiration to read the rest of the book.
Yeah.
But I was curious about something. This is a translated work.
Yes.
What is your sense of the translator's skill in achieving the rhythm that you had written in the Portuguese originally?
You know, I think that the translation was translated. The novel was translated by Alexandre, and I think he did a real good job. But my approach to translations usually is I don't care about translations in the sense that you know, as much as I'm able to communicate in English, you know, I would just not get all the subtleties. So I think that my job is to write the original, and the translator's job is to do the translation, and the editor's job is to edit the translators and, you know, and the author's jobs. So I trust my editor at Europe Editions blindly, Michael Reynolds. The only thing I asked was, Michael, is it reading well? And he said yes. So I trusted. And the first time I saw this was on the eve of my appearance at Penn World Voices Festival in New York, when I was selecting the, as Dr. Armando said, you know, right at the beginning of his presentation, it could have not worked out, but fortunately, it did. You know, I really think Alex Ladd did a very good job on the translation.
Yeah. Question?
Minister, a pleasure meeting you finally in person. I had the opportunity to read the book in the original Portuguese, and I have to coincide with you just from your reading that the beauty of the translation is impeccable in the sense that the translator is as frugal, as economical as you are in the designing of your sentences. My question is this just a coincidence that Sergio's last name begins with the letter Y, and then in Portuguese it means nothing, but then when you translate to English, it's like a questioning. Was that something you thought of before it was translated into English? Because when I first grabbed the book, we were in a cruise in Australia, and 5 people read my book in the 12 days of the cruise. And everybody said, Sergio,
I wish you know the cruise had a bookstore there. You know,
no, I took it in my suitcase. Yeah, we should have brought some more.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is a good question because no, this Y is totally accidental, but it was not. I mean, but I just learned that later. You know, things we do without really noticing. I mean, the names in this novel are special because I actually got names from real people. So I mean, one of the people named in the novel is there Victoria, who has dinner with Armando during his trip to New York, and the thing is that all people agreed to having their names except for Sergio, who was Sergio S. Period. But then when the Sergio S. had not assented to have his name, I had to find, and it was like the book was already, in the publishing house, that I had to act quickly. And then I went through like Armenian names, and then I saw Yakubian. And then I just got Yakubian, is the only name that is not an actual name, in fact. But I never thought that there is this fork, which is something that when the first Brazilian edition came out, I noticed, because the Y was like a big Y here, and you had the very clear notion there was like a way just opening up to two different, directions. And plus, the chromosome Y is the chromosome that defines gender. But this was a happy coincidence, or it was just like, a trap my unconscious set to myself. Yeah. So it was kind of, and it's a good thing, because Sergio Y, in English, it worked very well. But the translations are like, the working with translations is very funny, because Sergio Y worked very well in English, but we had a very tough time finding a name for the dog, because there's a dog whose nickname should be faith in English, or fé in Portuguese, or in Spanish. So in the original, the name of the dog is Fedra, for Hassini's character, shortened to Fé. And in Italian, it was Federica, Fede for short. But then in English, how would you, what name would be would function as, as a nickname for Faith? And then we found out that Mary and Faithful could be. So the name of the dog was Faithful for Mary and Faithful, Faith for short. I don't know how we're going to be doing with the next translations, but that's a problem.
Any other questions? Here, one sec.
Mr. Alexandre Porto. It seems to me that your book, you're not trying to reach to a specific group, but you're trying to reach for a general public. So it was your idea, your purpose to show the general public the psychological insights of people that live in this new modern diverse society that we find in big cities like New York and São Paulo, so then to understand better what is happening, what is going on, people that don't understand exactly this new world.
No, in fact, no. Of course, that I took the example of transgenderism, this crossing that you take within yourself. You change from one extreme identity to the other, but in fact, it was fortunate that I took this example. But what I'm talking about, much more, than of the migration or the reallocation of gender of Sergio living his male body to a female body, it's much more the sense of possibility of being like the real crossing is unhappy female to happy male. And then you can cross the male and the female and just have the crossing happy to unhappy. So I like to talk, I like to say that this novel is about a sense of possibility of getting in touch with yourself and finding your own identity, whatever it is, of being true to oneself, basically. So, no, I'm not trying to explain anything. When I started to write about this radical change or this radical crossing, I was thinking much more. I don't know if you know the poem, the Walt Whitman's poem, but maybe this will shed some light on it. Walt Whitman used to work in Brooklyn, and he would every morning take the ferry to Manhattan, and would just get enraptured by the elements, by the tides, by the light, by the seagulls, and especially by the people that were next to him in this crossing. And he wrote this poem to people who years hence would take the same ferry and make the same crossing and feel the same, experiment the same feelings and emotions he was experiencing then. And 70 years later, Fernando Pessoa wrote a poem called Salutation to Walt Whitman, in which he responds to Walt Whitman's poem and says, Walt, I am one of those, who made the same crossing and feels the same and is happy the same, and we're holding hands, And I think that it's a very important thing in this novel, this dialogue between generations of, the great-grandfather enabling the great-grandson, someone who made the crossing, who immigrated, because there is a story inside the story in the novel. So, you learning from, past generations, and this past generations enabling future generations. In Hebrew, you have the ledor vador thing, from generation to generation, one generation helping out the next one and enabling it. That's more or less the idea. I had no intention whatsoever of explaining or being educational or pedagogical about the phenomenon of gender identity or anything like that. But eventually it worked well, because one of the things that the reviewers have been noting about, about the novel is that it's one of the first novels where transgender people are treated as matter-of-factly as possible. The problem of understanding this transition is not Sergio or Sandra. Sandra and Sergio are very fine with this. They just had to have enough courage to, let's say, to trigger the whole process. Those who have to understand, in the case is the doctor. The doctor is the one who has to understand, I firmly believe that mankind comprises transgender people, and transgender people are allowed to blend in the human landscape seamlessly. We should not notice transgender people as much as we don't notice blondes or stuttering or whatever. It's just another possibility we as mankind are entitled to have.
Unless, of course, you're in Texas or North Carolina, right?
Exactly. No, in North Carolina, but things get better. It will get better.
Well, that was my question too. I know that your vocation is you work with the embassy and you're a diplomat, but in as undiplomatic terms as you can. And none of us will be offended. What do you think about the intolerance toward transgender people here in the United States?
I found it disgraceful, to put it in one word. Let me just.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think that if you think of 5 years ago or 5 months ago, things would even be worse. And I believe that we are the generation who has to enable the ones coming. It's our obligation, it's our responsibility. And I think that I like to think that this is a little, break in this construction. I find it disgraceful, but I would find it much more disgraceful if this subject was not discussed at all. So let's say that we are going through a disgraceful phase, but I am optimistic, all things considered.
Just to quickly add to that, I was thinking as you were reading that, for example, my kids, they don't have a problem with it. It's become and is becoming much more natural. Yeah. And maybe there is the technology, or maybe there's something about how easy it is to kind of switch roles and be more of a chameleon. And I was just, it felt very hopeful. And, also kind of looking around the room and seeing everyone, the men in suits and, and the Brazilian consulate. And then, just how is this going to go over? But no one really knows what's inside the heart and soul of anyone. Yeah. And it's not about, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to ramble
Christina,
on and on.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I've almost finishing a long book tour, so I'm after a long stretch here, and I've spoken to audiences on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and almost always I had the parents of transgender children in the audience. And you never know where this. I have 2 friends who have transgender people, and 10 years ago we would never have imagined. So I think that the main thing, and then we go back to what Mitch was saying, is this: I really believe in visibility, and I started believing in visibility as a gay person. I always thought that you don't have to hide. If you hide, it's because you have a reason to hide. So I think that you have to train other people's eyes, and you have to train other people's ears, and you have to make sure that they get used to the idea that mankind comprises transgender people. They are entitled to be here as much as any of us. And for them, what should we offer? We should offer acceptance. We should our embrace. Yes, come, be part of. In fact, we're not. We should even it's almost pretentious and to be offering acceptance, but because I mean they're entitled, they're in their right to seek acceptance and, as I said, to blend in our human landscape. So I believe that the question is visibility, and now you have children, you have people on TV. This is discussed, and you know when you bring this to light, then it becomes more normal. Normal, I mean acceptable, in the sense that it becomes more banal. It becomes more possible. You know. I had a son. I had a son. No, sorry, I have no children, but I have a friend from school who's a painter in New York. So I mean, the parents are Japanese. I mean, the wife of my friend is Japanese, and he's Japanese Brazilian, but he basically Japanese culturally. And this guy's a big painter. He lives in Chelsea, in that area. The kid goes to a 5-year-old kid goes to a public school in Chelsea, New York. So the kid is used to the idea of, let's say, of different sexual orientations or different sexual identities, etc. We were in Tokyo. I lived in Tokyo before being in São Paulo, and he was having an exhibit there, and I was visiting. And I asked the 5-year-old, Yuri is his name. Yuri, do you know whom you're getting married to? And he said, oh, I don't know if I'm getting married to Bob or to Susan. They are his two best friends at school. Just because this boy, from the very beginning, had this possibility of marrying his best male friend or his best female friend, which is a possibility that I could never think of as a kid, and that I would suffer for not having been, granted that. This Yuri is going to be a happier, kid than I was, most likely. And I was very glad to see this kind of difference in behavior and acceptance. So basically, that's it.
Here's a question.
So I very much enjoyed reading the book. And again, thank you for sharing it with us. I note a paradox in the very studied, difficult, long decision of Sergio to do what he does, and in the fate of Sandra, which we see through the figure of Lori Clay at the end, and the word that she uses to characterize what happens there, and again I won't spoil it, but she uses the word stupid, that what happened was stupid, when everything that led Sergio down his path was quite the opposite of that, right? As is all of the investment of all of the people who care about him, his parents, his doctor, and so forth. So I just have to, since I have access to you, I have to ask you why this paradox, and why do you give Sandra this fate when you could have given her quite a different one? If that's a unfair question, I know.
I think that I would banalize. I think that I would make Sandra so normal that she would be mortal. There is nothing more human and nothing more normal and nothing more expectable than death. So I think that was just like an additional layer of normalcy that I wanted to, even if it was an unfortunate normalcy. And it's something that any of us is subject, to a stupid death. And that was just a way of underlining, she is so normal. She makes part of this so much that she is vulnerable to death as much as any of us is. I didn't want to have Sandra becoming a superhero or a demiurge, nothing. I wanted her to be like normal as normal can be. And people die. At any given time, people may die.
Here's a question over here.
Hi. Understanding the book as a pursuit of happiness by Sergio, in which way can we try to see like some biographical characteristics of your history, like being a diplomat, now a writer, writing in Folha de São Paulo, and those kind of...
I don't like to admit it, but of course there is a parallel. I've done my crossings myself, from Fortaleza to São Paulo first, to Brasilia, to become a diplomat, to kind of reinvent myself as a diplomat. I used to be a lawyer at first, and then I had an ethical crisis, and the, let's say, the escape I found was diplomacy, but it was nothing that I was at age 11, I wanted to become a diplomat. No, I wanted to become a diplomat because it was what I could make at that point, you know, to get out of Fortaleza. I reinvented myself as a diplomat in Brasilia, but then I realized that it was not, you know, I get to Brasilia, work as a diplomat, I had a certain, you know, recognition, go work with interesting people, live in interesting places, but then I asked, is there all there is? I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy to be there. So that's why I took the radical decision of quitting the Foreign Service, of going public first, you know, with my homosexuality, and then starting with my, you know, LGBT advocacy, etc. Now I feel like going back to the Foreign Service because it's part of my identity. I like the idea of being a civil servant, you know, but I have no commitments, you know. My only commitment is here. You know, I have no commitment and to happiness, basically. So I'll go back, I will work a little more, and while it's working well, good. I have the great, you know, advantage of having nobody depending on me financially. So like working a job that I don't like or doing things that I'm not pleased with is not something that I would do for love. You know, and I think that the only option to do this kind of thing, or going through this, or belittling oneself through like torturing work, is if you have, you know, to feed children, if you have to send children to school, if you have to, you know, you have to do this for love, okay. But no, I want to be true to myself. I tell you, know, I took a long time to come to terms with my homosexuality. I had my quote of lying, trust me. You know, I lied so much during my life that I think I'm done with lying, even to myself. I don't want to lie anymore. And I just took it like in a radical way. And so far, so good, you know. I eat every day. I don't have debts. Oh, I'm a happy person. I tell you, the same thing that happened, if I have I end up having a stupid death, like a premature, which I hope I don't, because I really love living. But you can say, no, he went, okay, he's fine. He did what he had to do. You know, I'm not on overdraft in any case, in any way. I'm fine, you know.
Is there another book in the offing?
Yes. There is another book in the, there is a story of, I almost like, the other day someone wrote in Bomb magazine that my characters go from darkness to light. And I think this one is true because it's a, do you want me to talk a little bit about it? I love talking about some writers don't like talking about the books they're working on, but I really love it. It's a story of a guy who died the day before. You know, and he's already, but he's in limbo. Nothing happened to him yet. Nobody talked to him. There is no appointment. There is no engagement. There is no receptionist. He's just like in the dark. You know, he has no future because he knows he's dead. He has no present because everything is dark around him. So he starts to organize his past in the expectation that someone will come and talk to him, right? And then he tells 13 stories that relate, and this is our secret because it's not in the novel, but each one of the stories he tells relate to one of the scenes of Dante's Inferno. You know? But at the end, but the only reference to Dante is that he goes to school in São Paulo, and you have a kind of a affluent school in São Paulo that's called Dante Alighieri. It was close to where I live. So he went to this school where he's got his first girlfriend. But at the end of this, 13, stories that he tells, each one referring to a sin, he won't meet with devil or Mephistopheles or whatever. He will just meet with acceptance, of his human nature. So that it's almost finished. I think Europe Editions is publishing it in English as well. Oh. It's in Brazil. It's going to be out by Companhia das Letras. Wow. And the name so far, if editors don't change, and you know that editors have the power to change, it's in Portuguese it's Cloro, and in English is chlorine, the chemical element. Oh, the bulldogs. Well, the bulldogs, they landed safe and sound in DC, but after that, we had to take the dogs to Japan, which was not easy. It was the most bureaucratic thing I had to do, like lots of money, lots of bureaucratic, lots of dates. And now one of the oldest dog, the patriarch, died in Tokyo, so it's there. And the widow and the orphan are in Brazil, waiting for me. No, no, thank you for asking. They're very much part of my life. Yeah.
I have a question.
Tell me.
Did you get to research a book? How was that experience, living that experience of researching Sandra? Or
you know, I've known transgender people. I have transgender friends, but the one I had to, you know, the deepest research I had to do here is because I haven't read any from that, but it's the story of the Great Immigration. You know, the Lithuanians immigrating to Chicago. This was the most serious research I had to do. And, you know, I spoke with a lot of psychiatrists. I gave the book to a lot of transgender people. It's not that I wanted something to be... sorry, no, but I just wanted it to read true, you know, to ring true. It didn't have to be... You see that I say transsexual, and people say, you know, the most appropriate term would be transgender, etc. But I wanted to show the learning curve of the characters, you know. So Armando, at the beginning, he only speaks about transsexual, and then when he starts to get to know more, then he alternates between transsex and transgender, and at the end, he's all, you know, talking about transgender. Not that I don't think this is super important, but for some people it is, you know. And I think that in the just going back to what Christina was mentioning, that we have to make things more plausible, more visible, and more understandable. I think that using the right terms is important. So yes, I did some research, but the same kind of research I do in my columns. You know, I just don't want someone pointing a mistake, an error. I just wanted to make mistakes. But of course, I could not write this in the depth that a psychiatrist or a therapist would be able to.
Well, thank you for a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. You know, thanks Books and Books for having me. It was a big pleasure being here.
All right, folks, so if there are no more questions, we will have the book for sale at the counter in the front room over there, and Alexandre will be signing here at the table to the right of the podium. We have a great reception set up in the back. So I want to thank our partners this evening, the Consulate General of Brazil in Miami and Centro Cultural Brasil. I want to thank our host, Ambassador Helio Ramos. I want to thank Dr. Guzman for that great introduction of our author this evening. And this has been such a wonderful presentation. Please give another hand to Alexandre Vidal. Thank you very much. Thank you.